And here's the only thing I'm going to talk about with Sandy Hook. Aaron Walker goes on to ask, under what constitutional justification are conservatives appealing to as they argue psychologists ought to be given broad powers over our lives, including the ability to imprison people who've committed no crime? How does, in your opinion, the institutionalization of psychology in our government not violate the Establishment Clause, as psychology's primarily concerns are all prescriptive, what we think, feel, and how we behave? So the question becomes, we'll paint this in very broad strokes, okay? We're going to put this out here as, I understand I'm dealing in generalities here, but in general terms, we have a shooting like at Sandy Hook. The liberals say this is the fault of the guns. The guns are too easy to get a hold of. I think that's utter nonsense. Our response would be, look, this was done by crazy people. You're, by definition, in my definition of crazy, if you go into a room and start shooting people, you're crazy. You're clinically insane. And so the question then becomes, do you respond to the attempt to ban guns with an attempt to ban crazy people? Now we get into the arguments that I will make in more detail shortly, but I'll give you the short form of how I would make this Sandy Hook argument. And I'll give it to you in order of increasing importance. If I was defending Sandy Hook, the first thing I would say is, well, what do we know about Sandy Hook? Within a day or two of the shooting, we completely, apparently unrelated story. This is the kind of thing I'd like to have the research available for, because I'm about to make a declarative statement that I think is true, but is probably not quite exactly true. But a survey did come out just a week ago, and it listed the happiness index. Which countries are the happiest? America's 16th. We used to be number 1, but we're 16th now. And you know what's number 1? The happiest country in the world where people describe themselves as happiest? It's Switzerland. Here comes the declarative sentence. My understanding is that every household in Switzerland is required by law to have not a semi-automatic weapon or a handgun or a flintlock musket. They are required to have machine guns in the house. This is part of the Swiss National Defense Plan, that every single household is required to have a machine gun. A fully automatic weapon, so I'm not going to deal with I know the difference between these things, so let's talk like we actually know what we're talking about. A fully automatic weapon in every household in Switzerland. Certainly, if they're not required, they're everywhere. So what does that really say? It says that the happiest country in the world is required to have fully automatic weapons in every house, and mass shootings in Switzerland do not happen. So if the argument is that the easy availability of guns is what causes this, then all you have to do and look at Switzerland to say that every single household is not allowed to have, but required to have, a fully automatic weapon in it. So why, if it is the presence of the guns doing the killing, why is it that the country that has a fully automatic weapon in every household, why aren't they simply being murdered in the millions? Well, the answer is that they're not being murdered in the millions in Switzerland because it's not the gun. And that is all you need to say. That is prima facie evidence that it is not the gun. If every single household in Switzerland has a fully automatic weapon and nobody's being gunned down in Switzerland, it's got nothing to do with the gun. It's got to do with something else. It's got to do with the crazy, right? So let's talk about the crazy. We'll go up a level now on the argument. So it turns out, what do we know about this guy, whose name I don't remember and who I wouldn't say anyway? What does it say about the guy? Well, what do we know about him? We know that he was a video game player. I've played Counter-Strike. I've played all Medal of Honor. I've played Rainbow Six. I've played Ghost Recon. I've played Operation Flashpoint. I've killed hundreds of thousands of people on video games. Hundreds of thousands of them I've killed. Does this make me more likely to kill people? I don't know. But maybe we should ban the video games. Perhaps we should ban the video games. If we're going to ban guns, why don't we ban video games? Hi, Sin. Why don't we ban video games? Why don't we just do that? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't quite hear that. Did you say that would be unfair to the people who play video games and don't go out and murder everybody? Is that what you just said, Mr. Video Game Player? Well, what else do we know about the guy? We know he's one of these goth guys who is wearing the black trench coats. I will, when I do address this issue, I'm going to put that incredible piece of movie making, which is from the first Matrix, where the whole black trench coat thing came from, where Neo and Trinity walk into a lobby, and in maybe one of the most glorious movie sequences I've ever seen, to a fantastic piece of music called Spy Break, by the way, they simply shoot the living daylights out of a lobby, and everybody goes down. Policemen are going down. They're being murdered, and it is glorious. It's spectacular. It's wonderful. But we can't have movies like that anymore because they can drive people off the edge. So movies like The Matrix and this kind of violence in movies simply has to be banned. Banned. You can't see it anymore. For the children. I'm sorry. You're saying that you can't, that's not fair? That's not fair to ban those movies and that movie violence because it's unfair to all the people who go watch movies and don't shoot up schools? Well, this is an interesting train of thought we have here. Turns out that the kid was tremendously traumatized by his parents getting divorced. Well, that seems fully understandable to me. Lots of kids get traumatized by their parents being divorced. Why don't we go back to the divorce laws that we had in the 1940s? We didn't get schools shut up in the 40s, right? Okay, that's the answer. It's the prevalence of divorce. By the way, if you look at the people who are in prison for murder and anybody who's in prison, the one thing that 85% of the people who are incarcerated in the country cuts across class lines, cuts across religious lines, cuts across economic lines. 85% of the men who are imprisoned in this country for violent crimes are single mom, raised by single moms. They have no father. They have no male, strong male, in order to teach them how not to be animals. So obviously it's the divorce that's the issue, and we need to make divorce essentially impossible in this country for the sake of the children, right? Because this is what put this guy over the edge. What? That's not fair? It's not fair to blame it on the divorce? It's not fair? You're saying that there are millions of people who get divorced every year and millions of children of divorce every year, and they're not shooting up schools? Because what I'm detecting from you when you say you don't want to ban video games, you don't want to ban movie violence, you don't want to ban divorce, what I'm hearing you say is that millions of people go through these things and enjoy these things and don't shoot up schools, and it's not fair to punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. I'm in full agreement with you. I don't think it's fair to punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. This is exactly what you're trying to do. So there's another argument. Let's go up another level. God, these people. We're a nation of children. We're a nation of infants. There's 300 million Americans in this country. Let's do simple math. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody said autism. That was the one I meant to. Kelly, that's right. That's the last one, right? The kid's autistic. He's violent. He's acting out. He's violently acting out. We should just arrest the autistic people. And anybody with a history of any kind of mental illness, if you're a 16-year-old kid or 14 or 12 or 11 or whatever, if you're acting out and you're screaming and yelling and you're autistic or you've got Asperger's, I'm sorry, it's time for you to go to jail. Because you're a danger to the rest of us, you see. Kids could be killed if you get your hands on anything pointy or sharp or moving like a car or something like that, or a gun. Don't tell me we need to lock up the guns and keep them safe from people, which we're required to do by law, by the way, at least in California. We just put the autistic people in jail. I'll tell you one thing. If you put the mentally ill people in jail, these things would go away. But this is disgusting. It's a disgusting and disgraceful and an awful, 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 awful idea to preemptively punish people for crimes that they didn't commit. This is what they're doing. This is what they're calling for. So no one's talking about banning movies. No one's talking about banning video games. No one's talking about making divorce illegal. And no one's talking about putting Asperger's or autistic kids in jail in order to save the children. But they're applying all four of these arguments to putting guns away, which, as we found out from Switzerland, has nothing to do with it. So let's go up a level. How many Americans are there in this country? Let's 300 and some million, 315 million. Let's say 300 million. What's 10% of 3? It's easy math, right? The kind of math that even I can do. What's 10% of 300 million? 30 million. What's 1% of 300 million? 3 million. What's 1/10 of 1%? 300,000. What's 1/100th of 1%? 30,000. What's 1/1000th of 1%? 3,000. What's 1/10,000th of 1%? 300. What's 100,000th of 1%? 3. So we have a failure rate among American citizens. We had 3 shootings this year. We haven't had 3. Let's say we had 2. We have a failure rate among American citizens. If you want to describe it as a cog or anything, any other piece of machinery, our failure rate is 1/1000th of 1%. That's what the failure rate is in terms of the general population. With a population of this size, that's the number of units that fail this way. 1/1000th of 1%. Is there any product on the earth that functions on this level of accuracy? Is there anything that's been made ever that functions better than this? No. Is this truly an epidemic? How many kids are killed by see, this is where you know that they're not serious, because when you start getting into save the children, if you were talking about saving children's lives, you would be on fire to do the thing that kills the most children. You'd get that out of the way first. And handguns are not in the top 30, I don't think. I'm quite sure they're not. Right? So it's not about the children. It's not about the children. It's about you having an easy solution to something, and you are talking about banning something that you don't have. This is another thing that drives me crazy about these people. People who don't fly want to close down airports. People who don't use jet skis want to get rid of personal watercraft. People who don't have guns want to ban guns, but they don't want to ban the things that they do have, which is video games, violent movies, divorces, and autistic kids. They don't want to ban any of those because that would hit close to home, you see. We'll ban other things that other people have. So the failure rate is an issue, and we'll go up another level. None of this matters. It's a right. It's a natural right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can't take it away. It's a natural. You can legislate it away, but you cannot remove it from us. We're born with it. It's a natural right to defend ourselves, and you can't take it away from people. You can try, but you can't do it. I'm not saying you can't make it happen. They did it in Nazi Germany. They did it everywhere else where hundreds of millions of people have been killed. So let's take that argument for a second. Look, 20 kids killed. I have no idea what that's like. I'm not going to pretend what that's like. And if you say you don't know what it's like because you don't have kids, that's bogus too. Because even if you do have kids, you don't know what it's like until it happens to you. But I'd be willing to bet you that if your kid was murdered at Sandy Hook, you would be willing to make a deal with God where you would say to God, you take every single awful thing that ever happened to me, every moment of pain, every moment of sorrow, every catastrophe that's ever happened to me, and I want you to give them to me nonstop from morning to night, 18 hours a day for the rest of my life. Just give me my kid back. I have no doubt at all that's what it's like. But what are we talking about here, right? I mean, we are counting the hits, but we're not counting the misses. When you have, look, you see these pictures. You see these pictures of these kids, these 20 faces, and you connect it to faces, and people will say, we got to do something. But I would just simply say to you, go back and look at pictures from World War II and look at all of the faces of these children that are being pulled out of the Warsaw Ghetto, or the faces of the little kids that are in concentration camps, the faces of the kids as the families are being split up into the ones that are going to live for another week or two and the ones that are immediately going into the gas chambers. Look at all the faces of those little kids and look at the faces of those women and those wives and stuff, and understand that you're seeing 1 in a million, 1 in 500,000. For every single face you see, there's 100,000 faces that you don't see. Why were the Jews taken to gas chambers? Because you could send 2 guys in with guns and pull a family of 9 out. What are they going to do? Nothing. They can't do anything. There were 6 million Jews gassed, another 6 million other people gassed because they couldn't resist. It's 12 million people. It's not 12 people. It's 12 million people. And people say, well, that could never happen here. Says who? It could never happen here. Says who? Well, our government would never do that. Really? Really? I'm a big student of Adolf Hitler, right? I'm a very, very intense student of Adolf Hitler. I don't study Adolf Hitler because I admire Adolf Hitler. I study Adolf Hitler because I don't want to ever see another Adolf Hitler again. And by the way, Hitler's a piker compared to Stalin and Mao. But let's talk with Hitler because he's the poster child and everybody knows Hitler because there's pictures. See, the reason we despise Hitler and the reason everybody hates Hitler and talks about the Holocaust is because there's pictures. There's some pictures of those 6 million Jews. There are no pictures of the 30 million kulaks. I've looked for them. There's 2. There's no pictures at all of the 30 million, 50 million peasants that were starved by Mao and the other socialists. So you've got socialist in China, 50 million dead. You got socialist in Russia, 30 or 40 million dead. You got national socialists in Germany, 12 million dead. All of these people are unarmed. All of these people can't resist. Can't happen here. Well, when the Nazis came to power in Germany, the Nazis did not come to power by getting on a stage and say, if you'll simply vote for us, we're going to level our own cities. There's going to be nothing but ruins, and we're going to take 12 million of our neighbors out and shoot them in the back of the head or gas them to death. Because if they had said that, they wouldn't have been elected. When the Nazis came to power promising hope and change, and they talked about health care for everybody and full employment and government works programs to make sure that everybody's done. They demonized the rich. They demonized a special class of people, which they called the Jews, the vampires, the bloodsuckers, the money changers, all this other stuff, demonized their way into politics, and then it just happened. Because I'm convinced, actually, that what actually happens is it's not even that they it was the power. The power is the ring. The ring corrodes people. Now, Adolf Hitler was never a good man. Adolf Hitler was a villain and a monster from the time he was being brutalized by his alcoholic dad. But power made him worse, and people who may not have been anything like that evil were made evil by the power. Heimlich Himmler was a chicken farmer. There was some petty, they talked about the banality of evil. Something so petty and trivial about the guy, something so weak and pathetic, but he had unlimited power, and so he ended up by his own hand killing millions of people. So don't tell me that it couldn't happen here. They never come in and talk about what's going to happen. They always talk about the healthcare, and they talk about the exact same things. And the only thing that prevents 12 million people being dead instead of 12 people being dead is that they cannot simply walk into a room and kick a door down here. This is the first thing I ever talked to my dad about, the first political thought I ever had with my father. And this was in this freedom essay about gun rights. I was seeing pictures. I was looking at pictures in school of Jews lined up to go walk into a pit. You see the pit. You see the people in the pit. You're standing in line. You see the guys on the top of the pit shoot 12 people in the pit, and they fall down dead, and then another 12 people go and stand in the pit. And I said, why don't they run? And he said, well, I don't know, Bill. I don't think we would sit there and hold off in line. It's because the government treated us like adults. Our government treats us like adults, like we're real people. I'm not blaming the Jews for this. What do they know about resistance? What do they know about any of it? These are musicians and they're scientists and doctors, and their entire strategy for 1,000 years has been to keep your head down. But we're not raised that way. And when you hear Europeans say things like, well, it's you Americans and your vicious gun, this and that, and so on, what it really ultimately comes down to, Europe can be Europe and can lecture us about this stuff because of America. If there was no America, every single person in Europe would have to be like every single person in Switzerland. You're looking at this giant Russian behemoth that's towering over you. It's our ability to defend Western Europe and Canada at our expense, and at our expense morally, that allows these people to get on their high horse and lecture us about all this other stuff. So look, what is the answer to this? I don't know what the answer to this is, but it's a right that cannot be taken away. And now I'll take the gun argument up to the upper top level of the argument. Because you can take all of this stuff away, and what you're left with what really is at the core of what's driving the response to this, and that you can get to the core of the problem in the sentence that I've heard 100,000 times after this shooting and every other shooting, and that is this: Are our children not safe anywhere? Are you saying that we can't even send our children to school? They can't even be safe in school? That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, because the core, final, fundamental problem with what we're talking about here is this idea of safety. It doesn't exist. It is impossible. It is physically impossible in this world. Are you saying our children can't be safe getting an ice cream cone? That's exactly what I'm saying. Are you saying that children can't be safe in a nursery? Yep. Are you saying that our children can't be safe driving to school? That's exactly what I'm saying. This idea is insane. It's insane. It's a childish, infantile, adolescent, moronic way to look at the world. Am I not safe? You're saying I can't be? I'm saying you can't be safe anywhere ever. No one is ever safe anywhere ever. That's the reality of the world. And you don't want to live in a world where there is perfect safety, because perfect safety consists of being in the little thing we talked about, the Matrix earlier. Perfect safety is you're sitting in a pod and people are sucking the electrical power out of your brain. You're fully fed, you're fully contained, you never get up, you never move. That's perfect safety. Everything else is an illusion. Life is dangerous. Life is a risk-reward, and it is the sign of civilizational rot that we have achieved so much, and we have reached this asymptotic sense of reality where we have achieved so much that every single time you try to progress a little bit more, it gets harder and harder and harder. There is no perfect safety. You get a hot coffee at McDonald's, and if you spill it on your own lap, it's going to burn you. So what do? We make sure nobody gets hot coffee anymore. It's madness. It's madness. I understand how this sounds to the parents of one of these kids, but you know what? I'm not going to be beaten up by that sense of moral outrage, because we have consequences to these decisions. We have to make these decisions rationally as adults. And, of course, the fact that the place where there are the most guns is where there's less crime is lost on all these people, obviously. But this is fundamentally the problem, ultimately. Everything else, every single other argument that I just gave you is irrelevant in the face of the fact that if people expect that there's such a thing as perfect safety, then this will never end. It'll never end. None of it will ever end. Regulations will never end. Rules will never end. Lecturing will never end. My light will never stand up. Give me 1 second. Anyway, shame to interrupt a good rant by something like that, but I have a little ad hoc situation here at the studio. I think we'll take care of all of this in the future too. Here I am back again. Anyway, it's probably good that the light got a little moved there, and then the white balance shifted, so that. Okay, yeah, we're nothing but professionals here in the Stratosphere Lounge, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do the white balance again. That's a little bit. Anyway, we'll move on. That's how to get that out of my system, and we'll get into that in a little more detail downstream.